Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. This is Central Rocks. Have you heard of us before? We're a geology program here taped on the campus of Central Washington University in Ellensburg, Washington, USA, 98926. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't seen us before, here's the deal. We highlight research and teaching done here at Central Washington University in the geology department. We've gone through darn near the whole program at this point with faculty and staff, and we reach deep into the grab bag today to grab Jim Hinthorne. Jim is a veteran of our department for many, many years, taught here in 1980 to 2001, has been in retirement status since then, but continues to teach, and we'll talk about that. Jim's a California boy, Santa Barbara, University of Massachusetts, got his PhD in 1974. Hey, Jim, can I thank you for coming on the program today?
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate being here.
You're a good sport. You're in Ellensburg. It's summertime. What brings you to town?
Well, Ellensburg normally is cooler than most of any place else we could be in the summer.
Right.
And this year has been a little bit different, but we have a lot of family here since we raised our kids here in town. And,
still.
And my folks moved here, so we still have a lot of relatives here in town, a lot of friends we come back every few summers to see and visit with, and this summer Central gave me a small teaching opportunity in the summer school, so that was all to the good.
Right, and it was a Geology 101, I assume?
Yes, a physical geology course, right.
You spent so many years here teaching, so there wasn't a whole lot of preparation necessary probably to do the 101?
No, there wasn't. Teaching for 20 years on the quarter system, and that course, most every quarter, you tend to have it pretty well in hand at that point.
Sure. Were you the first guy to come to Ellensburg, and then all of your family members eventually kind of landed in Ellensburg? Is that how it went?
Not quite.
Okay.
Not quite. It's more complicated, as most of my life is. I actually started kindergarten in Ellensburg in 1947.
Is that so?
And my folks moved up here because my dad's sister moved up here the year before and had a small dairy farm and so forth for a few years, and then my dad moved up and started a small construction business, and we were here for 6 or 8 months before going back to Southern California.
Oh my goodness.
And then in 1980 there was an opportunity to return.
Well, yeah, let's take that one step at a time. So much of your youth was in Southern California, and you went to the University of Santa Barbara, University of California at Santa Barbara for your undergrad. I'm always curious how people stumble into geology. It's rarely a plan from 7th grade on.
Right.
What's your take on the story?
Well, my story is when I was in community college, I took a course called Physical Science that included a segment on geology, and it was the part of the course I thought I understood the best for some reason. I had been outdoors quite a bit, hunting and fishing and hiking for several years, and so I kind of related to that. And when I needed a major to graduate, somewhere in my 3rd year of college, I'd been through 2 or 3 different majors, and it just seemed to me I ought to try that one because I had liked it a couple of years before. And so I started very late in the major and had most of my other math and science completely done. And then it was just geology courses for a couple of years to finish off the degree.
Terrific. And when you were doing your doctoral work then, flashing forward a few years, you had narrowed your focus in geology to, I assume, hard rock stuff and maybe minerals in particular.
Right.
What was the general project that you were working on there in the late 60s, early 70s?
Right. My PhD dissertation was on the conditions of metamorphism that have affected some rare rock types that are found only 4 or 5 places in the world, and 3 of them happen to be up and down the Sierra Nevadas and into Baja California, nearby where I was, so it worked out rather well in terms of a small amount of field work and a large amount of lab work, which is kind of the way I envisioned myself as okay in the field, but I like the lab work quite a lot.
And were you teaching yourself much of that instrumentation and those analytical techniques, or did you have a mentor that was taking you every step of the way?
Right. In my master's program at the University of Massachusetts, I had a real strong mentor in mineral sciences and analytical methods that were modern at that time, and learned them pretty well there, and I could apply them with the same instrumentation at Santa Barbara, and so there was a lot of carryover.
Sure.
And the mineral collection at Santa Barbara was fairly robust, and I could use part of that in my thesis.
Huh.
And then I did laboratory experimentation that lasted anywhere from each experiment from a week to a month.
Right.
And when the coursework was done, I looked around for a job while I completed the rest of the lab work and wrote my thesis.
Well, this is where the story gets especially interesting, I think, because many of the guests we've had on this show started in academia, went through the right progressions as an NFL quarterback, I suppose, reading all their progressions, going through, and then staying in academia, teaching at a four-year university, maybe continuing their research. Jim Hinthorne takes a detour and leaves academia with that first job, maybe even while you were working on your dissertation. You were kind of had one foot in both worlds. So was it a company that you landed a job in?
Right. I went to work for Applied Research Laboratories, who had a small advanced research office in Santa Barbara right across the airport from the university.
Oh, convenient.
So there was, yes it was, I could do both things full-time almost. And another thing that struck me at the time was my wife had been supporting me for several years of graduate school, and I was beginning to feel slightly guilty about that. So I did look around for a job and wrote letters to 5 essentially high-tech research companies in the Santa Barbara area, and this one responded, and we hit it off very well that first summer, and it turned into permanent employment.
So this is late 60s, early 70s.
69.
And what kind of technology were you were learning how to use? You were selling? What was
We did it all. The advanced research lab I was in provided sales support to salesmen around the world, and we did instrumentation development for chemical analysis of solid materials. And so we dealt with everything from cement plants to steel mills, aluminum, geological research people, and I had apparently a knack for several aspects of the business. I found some, to my surprise, that I was comfortable talking to customers about the advantages and capabilities of the equipment we built and sold. And then I could put my other hat on and spend 3 or 4 weeks or a month doing nothing but collecting data, analyzing data to see how well the new instrumentations and modifications were working.
And was there one gizmo we're talking about? I've heard this word microprobe. Is this this the area we're dealing with here?
Actually, worked on principally on 2 different kinds of microprobe. One is the electron microprobe, which was about 5 years into its maturity at that point in time. It was still a manually operated instrument, no automation systems, and it would take literally hours and days to do an analysis and reduce the data for just a few chemical analyses of points on samples. And then they transitioned me over to using a brand new instrument that had never even been sold, that was just in development stages, and worked on the engineering prototype of that one, which was just a bunch of steel and wires and magnets and everything else. And that was an ion microprobe. And there I was able to do some of the first geologic applications of that ion microprobe technique, which today is very standard and widely used.
So these are almost prototype
The
machines?
instrumentations I used were prototyped. The applications were all prototyped. And I was allowed freedom to just see what the instruments were capable of doing.
Sounds like a nice gig. I mean,
It was a nice gig.
So you were working on your PhD at the time? Were you somehow using your work and then somehow shuffling? Or
I used a small amount of my microprobe experience to support my PhD research, but it was pretty well cast in its direction before I had gone to work.
I see.
Or before I had learned very much about my work. It turned out that I became a full-time employee of the company just within a few days of when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969.
Ah,
Yeah.
that was a heady time, I suppose.
It was a very heady time for research scientists of all types.
There wasn't any connection with Jet Propulsion Laboratory or
No, we were strictly a commercial organization rather than government funded in any way. But we did soon after, because the fellow I worked directly under also had a geology undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
And we did take an interest in the lunar rocks and got some small contracts over the next 4 or 5 years to use some of our new instrumentation on the lunar samples.
Nice.
And found some information that other people couldn't find out at that point in time.
Well, so we're in the 70s, you're doing sales, you're working with technology, and that would be it for most people's career. They continue in that, they work their way through the company, etc.
Certainly could have done that.
Yes, this is where I'm fascinated. At some point you decide, I think I'm going to get back into higher education in some form. Was it a midlife crisis, Jim? Was it something overnight, or was it a gradual change?
I had as an undergraduate and a graduate student, a couple of mentors in my education that really influenced me a lot. And over the years that I was working in industry, the thought occurred to me that I would really like to do the kinds of things they do and affect students the way they affected students. And so there was a time in the about late 70s that I began to think seriously about it. And by the time 1980 rolled around, I was looking at ads and so forth. I had been promoted to being in charge of their research and development group with about 20 scientists, engineers, programmers reporting to me. And it wasn't quite as much fun anymore being a manager as it was being in the trenches with the equipment.
Nice.
And so I started looking around for opportunities, and an ad came up to be a department chairman in Ellensburg. And
you say, hey, I know Ellensburg.
Ellensburg. I remember a little creek and some wooded areas in Ellensburg I used to play in. And so I applied, and after an interview up here and so forth, I was selected to be the department chair of a small department, Central, with kind of a mandate to eventually make it grow.
Yeah, well, can you paint the picture for us? The size of the department, the general scene on campus. This is 1980, Central Washington University Geology.
Sure, yeah. But what, between 6,000 and 7,000 students, as I remember. We had a department of myself, 3 other people, and then 1 course a year was taught by a combined biologist in the biology department. He taught 1 course a year for us. And so we could have a major and service the majors reasonably well. Although until Mount St. Helens erupted, we didn't have a big influx of students as geology majors, but Mount St. Helens solved that problem for us.
You did see a noticeable change?
Yes, just about tripled our major enrollment.
Oh my.
With some excellent science students from across the state who all of a sudden took an interest in geology. And I'm proud to say most of them that showed up that year as freshmen did work or are working as geologists these days.
Excellent, excellent. Yes. Focus on teaching.
My focus has been on teaching.
Yes,
it was.
In the department, I know Bob Bentley was doing some field mapping maybe during the summers.
Yes.
Was there other research? I'm trying to get a sense of how different that department was than we have now with so much research going on. What kind of balance was there?
Right, there was not very much research going on. Bob Bentley was the principal person out beating the bushes in Central Washington and teaching the rest of us about the real nitty-gritty of Central Washington geology.
Sure.
And after I got here, I found out in the first year that this is one of the better places I could have ever found to teach geology from the point of view of rocks in the field.
You bet.
Many months of the year we can get out and see the variety that's almost inaccessible anyplace else near a university.
That's nice to hear that. I have those feelings, but with a guy like you that's been traveling for a long time, it's nice to hear this is such a unique place for field locations, etc. So were there clear objectives for you when you first came? You were the chair right off the bat. Were there changes, major changes necessary, or you were just an addition to the staff?
I was an addition, but since I had the 3 or 4 years of management experience, I also was asked to put the department personnel on a more even keel with a long-term plan, and see what we could do about, as I say, growing the department eventually.
Right.
And through the economic downturns of the early and mid-'80s, and then things got a little bit better toward 1990, we were finally given the opportunity to start hiring, and the second or third time I had planned a master's degree, I was finally allowed to present the plan, along with some new people that would help implement it.
Let's speak about those people. So this is 91, 92, and who shows up?
Gosh, I guess it was Megan Miller and husband Charlie Rubin, both from JPL and Caltech, and came in and made a large difference in the department and started us down the road to research as well as teaching. And from there, pretty much I retired as chair and turned it over to them and watched it grow.
And I'm curious how you felt. There was so much change in such a short amount of time. I showed up about that same time,
Yes, you did.
and there was this, you know, change is wonderful, change is good. If it happens too quickly, you wonder about alienated people or upsetting the status quo. What was your take on all of that change? Was it all good? Do you think we lost anything in some of that change for starting the grad program, doing all this research?
I don't think we've lost anything. I really think decisions, a few decisions that I made and a lot of decisions that other people made afterwards have been to the betterment of the university from top to bottom.
That's nice to hear.
Students, university reputation, reputation across the state, etc. I think it's all been positive from these changes. And you know yourself, we've gone from when I first got here less than 10 majors to now we're consistently running around 80, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
And students are pretty capable of figuring out what's going on.
Yes, they are. I was always very fond of the way that you dealt with students. It was always the students were first. If there were rules in place, you were willing to be flexible. If you were advising them, you know, you were really trying to be accommodating. And I'm trying to figure out, just sitting here talking to you, if that approach was those mentors you talked about and how they dealt with you way back when, or did you have a different perspective about academia with you being away from this world for a while and coming back?
Right.
How, both of those maybe?
Several things. I was raised by parents who instilled ideas of fairness and reasonableness and things like that, and without hard and fast, let's say, rules. And then my mentors, particularly as an undergraduate, dealt with me that way. And I know the positive influences it had on my life, and so I figure I can give back by being in a similar mode with students over the years.
Well, it's not a common thing, and you know.
I realize it's not common at the universities for people to want to accommodate and always put the students first. But it was certainly my attitude that we're here for them and not the other way around.
Well, it left a big impression on me. As I advise students, I often think of how you dealt with those things, and it seemed to work for you. It's working for me too.
I see it's working for you. Yes.
Now, the GIS was part of your time here, the GIS
Yes.
program. Can you tell us what GIS is, and did you start that program here?
Well, I was involved when it got started.
Okay.
Really, a fellow named Professor Bill Smith in anthropology, archaeology, first considered bringing the technology to campus.
What is GIS?
Geographic information systems, essentially dealing with maps and all of the data you can plot on maps via computer systems.
Okay. All right.
And it's become pretty standard, almost low-tech stuff these days. But in 1983, when we got started with first piece of equipment, we had to figure out a lot of new things. And so I was trying to figure out how to teach and use the software we had acquired in geology. John Ressler, was trying to figure it out for geography. and he was a good cartographer, so he had a good handle on the map making part. And Bill Smith was a good archaeologist, including underwater archaeology, and so he had a need for plotting data on computers.
This is in the 80s sometime?
83, 84,
Okay.
I believe we had one computer system with one graphics terminal on it and a class of 18 first year.
Wow.
Needless to say, students signed up for computer time 24 hours a day. And one of us tried to be there at least most of our waking hours.
Oh my heavens.
To help them and to teach ourselves the systems.
Now, did you feel comfortable with computers in the early 80s? Did you have experience teaching yourself some of this stuff?
I had a lot of experience while working for ARL with computer systems.
In the 70s?
In the 70s,
Yeah.
right.
What's that like?
Punch paper tape for quote mass storage devices, and toggling the switches on the front of the computer to put basic programs in and modify programs, and using the old noisy military teletype machines as our input-output devices.
No kidding.
And the company itself had a long history. They actually put an automated machine in the field in 1950. And it was still operational in the late 80s with the same computer they put in the 1950s.
Is that right?
And cranking out chemical analyses in some steel mill somewhere. And it was, but there was some history there.
Yeah.
But the engineers they were bringing on board were more computer oriented. And so I became a software resource because I was on the application side and was trying to make the machines do better and more fancy things, and then they would provide me a computer to interface to the instrument and electronic engineers to do it.
My goodness.
So I was writing software in basic Fortran and data processing software in PL1 and Fortran. And then eventually, after I got to Central in the GIS program,
Yes.
I learned C programming. And somewhere in the middle there, I learned assembler language programming.
My heavens.
For a particular kind of instrument we used at ARL.
So you stopped your teaching career here at Central in 2001, but you just can't quite quit the habit, it sounds
Can't
like.
quite quit the habit. No, in 2006 it finally took over again, and I came back, or 7. I came back to Central in 2007 and taught a summer school course, just as an experiment to see if I still wanted to be in front of the students in the classroom and responsible for evaluations and things like that. And turns out I was pretty happy afterwards. So when I went back down to South Texas for the winter, where we spend our winters, I contacted the university there, and they provided a spring semester opportunity for me to teach again, beginning geology course because they needed some help. And so I did that, and it worked into the same thing the next summer, 2
Terrific.
courses, and then this fall they've got me scheduled to teach 2 courses again.
Just like the old days.
Helping out and feeling just like the old days, yeah. I'm pretty specialized now, and I teach 1 course as often as everybody needs it.
I'm sure you're very good. I'm sure those students appreciate it. So which school are you teaching at now then?
It's University of Texas Pan American campus, down about 20 miles north of the Rio Grande River, near Brownsville, Texas.
Okay. And how do those students, is there a way to generalize in the couple minutes we have left the student population there versus your students you were dealing with here a few years earlier at Central?
I don't see a lot of difference. I don't see a lot of difference. The geology program there is small with just a few courses and no major, but the students we get in the general education courses and things, I would not put them in any different category at all than the Central students. It's pretty much a toss-up.
Well, you were successful here in reaching the students, so I have no doubt that you're reaching them there as well. And that nomadic lifestyle that you're leading is maybe not as nomadic as it was a little bit earlier. If you're stationed there for a good 6 months at a time,
Right.
you're still
right.
RVing a little bit with Gene?
We live in an RV, and aside from teaching assignments and wanting to be in the South Texas region in the winters, we pretty much go where we want to in the summer.
Terrific.
And last summer it was northern New Mexico because we had never seen much of that country, and it's a place we will go back to, and I'm sure we'll try some other places too.
Excellent. Well, it was a real treat to have you here, Jim. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Enjoy it very much.
Another installment of Central Rocks has come and gone. Thank you so much for joining us. Look for us online. We've got these shows online now. We'll give you information about that down the road. Thanks again. See you next time.